Mr. President, desperate to distract from the $93 trillion price tag of their so-called Green New Deal, the Democrat leadership here in the Senate has been coming down to the floor to claim that Republicans are ignoring climate change. On February 14th, the Democrat leader came to the floor and said, since Republicans took control of this chamber in 2015, they've not brought a single Republican bill to meaningfully reduce carbon emissions to the floor of the Senate. Not one bill. That's end quote from the Democrat leader just a month ago. Well, Mr. President, that would be news to me, and I think it'd be news to some Democrat senators here as well. On January 14th of this year, for example, the President signed into law the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act. That legislation, led by Republican Senator Barrasso and co-sponsored by both Republicans and Democrats, paves the way for new advanced nuclear technologies which will help further reduce carbon emissions. Here's what the Democrat ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee had to say about this bill, and I quote, "Nuclear power serves as our nation's largest source of reliable, carbon-free energy, which can help combat the negative impacts of climate change and at the same time foster economic opportunities for Americans. This is another important step in our fight against climate change," end quote. That from the Democrat ranking member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Let me repeat that, Mr. President. This is another important step in our fight against climate change. That's coming from a key Democrat on a key committee that deals with this issue. That's not a Republican talking. That's the Democrat ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee. Then, of course, there's the Furthering Carbon Capture Utilization Technology, Underground Storage, and Reduced Emissions Act, granted a fairly long title. Several Republicans are co-sponsors, original co-sponsors of that, and it became law as part of the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018. The Future Act, as it's referred to, extends and expands tax credits for facilities with carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration technologies, referred to as CCUS technologies. Here's what the Clean Air Task Force had to say about this legislation, and I quote, "The U.S. Congress took a landmark step by passing one of the most important bills for reducing global warming pollution in the last 2 decades," end quote. A landmark step by passing one of the most important bills for reducing global warming pollution in the last 2 decades. That's a quote from the Clean Air Task Force and what they had to say about that legislation. Well, then there's the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act, led by Republican Senator Mike Crapo, which became law in September. This legislation will help support the development of advanced nuclear reactor designs, which will increase America's supply of clean and reliable energy. Here is what the junior Democrat senator from Rhode Island had to say about this legislation. And I quote, "Partnerships between the private sector and our world-class scientists at national labs will help bring new technologies forward to compete against polluting forms of energy. I am proud to have worked with Senator Crapo to get this bipartisan energy legislation over the finish line," end quote. Here's what the junior senator from New Jersey, Democrat, had to say. "Reducing our carbon emissions as quickly as possible requires prioritizing the development and commercialization of advanced nuclear reactors, which will be even safer and more efficient than current reactors. Passage of this legislation will provide critical support to startup companies here in the United States that are investing billions of dollars in these next-generation reactor designs," end quote. And here's what the Democrat whip himself had to say, and I quote, "I was proud to join Senator Crapo on this bipartisan bill," end quote. Well, Mr. President, I could go on. I could talk about the 2018 Farm Bill, which in the words of Earth Justice contains, and I quote, "a number of provisions that incentivize more climate-friendly practices," end quote. I serve on that committee. I was involved in the conservation title and drafting that, including a number of provisions in there. or the provision in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 to ensure the completion of our first 2 new nuclear reactors in a generation, which will prevent 10 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions annually, or the extension of wind and solar clean energy tax credits, or the bipartisan America's Water Infrastructure Act, which will help advance hydropower projects, a significant source of emission-free energy. Well, Mr. President, suffice it to say that Republican senators have passed more than one bill to protect our environment and help America achieve a clean energy future. And we're not stopping here. So why all the misdirection on the part of the Democrats? Well, Mr. President, I'm sure Democrats think it's politically advantageous to portray themselves as the only party that's invested in clean energy. And then, of course, Democrats are desperate to distract from the details of the $93 trillion Green New Deal that their presidential candidates have embraced. That's right. I said $93 trillion. One think tank has released a first estimate of what the Green New Deal would cost, and the answer is between $51 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years. That is an incomprehensible amount of money. For comparison, the entire federal budget for 2019 is less than $5 trillion. The 2017 gross domestic product for the entire world, the entire planet, came to $80.7 trillion, more than $10 trillion less than Democrats are proposing to spend on the Green New Deal. $93 trillion, Mr. President, is more than the amount of money that the United States government has spent in its entire history. Since 1789, when the Constitution went into effect, the federal government has spent a total of $83.2 trillion. That's right. It's taken us 230 years to spend the amount of money Democrats want to spend in 10. Even attempting to pay for the Green New Deal would devastate working families who would be hit with incredibly high new taxes. Now, let's be very clear about this. This is not a plan that can be paid for by taxing the rich. Taxing every family making more than $200,000 a year at a 100% tax rate for 10 years wouldn't get Democrats anywhere close to $93 trillion. Taxing every family making more than $100,000 a year at a 100% tax rate for 10 years would still leave Democrats short of $93 trillion. And of course, the amount of money we're talking about, as horrifying as it is just one negative aspect of the Green New Deal. Democrats' Green New Deal is a full-blown socialist fantasy that would put the government in charge of not just energy, but health care and all other various aspects of the American economy. One of the Green New Deal's authors posted and then deleted a document from her website noting that the Green New Deal would provide economic security for those unable or unwilling to work. That's right. In Democrat socialist fantasies, apparently the government will provide you with economic security if you're unwilling to work. Well, let's hope there are enough willing workers to fund those who are unwilling to work. After all, that $93 trillion has to come from somewhere. Mr. President, it's no wonder that Democrats are trying to change the subject when it comes to the Green New Deal. They don't want to have to defend the specifics of their plan because their plan is frankly indefensible. If Democrats would like to have a serious discussion about energy, they should repudiate the unfathomably expensive Green New Deal and join Republicans in focusing on ways to secure a clean energy future without devastating the economy or bankrupting working families.